views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Welcome to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have a strong show today. State Senator Alessandra Biaggi will be on the show, discuss the New York HEROES Act. Very, very important, especially in terms of protecting those who work at nursing homes. We also have a State Senator Brad Hoylman will be here discussing the walking while trans law to protect members of our society who really need our support. And finally on our show is Rose Pierre-Louis, can give you all you need to know when it turns about voting in New York City, a completely different law that's going to be taking effect immediately and will be with us for years to come. So as you can see, we have much to get to. Today's verdict starts right now. Okay, we're back at today's verdict with New York State Senator Alessandra Biaggi. So happy to have you back, Alessandra. First of all, how you been? It's been a couple of months. We haven't seen you.
Well, we're just looking forward to getting vaccinated. But all things considered, knock on wood, I am healthy. My family's healthy. So I guess there's nothing to complain about. Now and everything else is just, extra on top of that.
It looks like we're in the home stretch, and that would be really amazing if we could all get our shots by the end of May. But let's turn a little bit to some people who have not been so lucky, and those are those in the nursing homes. Some issues certainly Governor Cuomo has been having to deal with. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, in the past year or so, I think one of the things that we've seen is a real focus on those who are in nursing homes as it relates to COVID. Why is there a focus on it? Because from the very beginning of this pandemic, we knew that the most vulnerable people are those who are in nursing homes, the elderly. And why do we know that? Because when COVID first came to the United States, or at least when we first were made aware of COVID in the United States, it was Washington State, and it hit a nursing home. And that's where several elderly members or residents of the nursing home died. And so since that point in time forward, there's been a real not only emphasis but focus on nursing homes. A lot of families who have loved ones in nursing homes have been, to say the word traumatized is probably not too dramatic at all. They have, because if you can just remember, and let's go back about a year, there was so much that we didn't know, right? We didn't know about testing. We didn't know about so many of the other comorbidities that we now know add to an increased risk of death. And so you have loved ones who, are really worried about those who are in nursing homes. And so flash forward, March 25th of 2020, as I'm sure people who are watching can remember, your viewers can remember, there was this directive from the Department of Health that basically said, if you're a nursing home resident and you get discharged from the hospital, but you're COVID positive, you can go back to the nursing home without being tested again before you go back in. Now, that, I think any normal, average, reasonable person who's thinking is probably something that would create risk or perhaps, cause increased risk of infection. And what we now know, looking back, and of course, because of the Attorney General's report, this just about a month ago, is that it did increase not only the risk of infection, but also it increased the risk and the effect of having more deaths in nursing homes. That on top of so many other problems that we saw, lack of PPE, lack of testing, really an inability to separate those who were COVID positive from those who were not COVID positive. And it was really this perfect storm of variables that came together and, it resulted in what we know now to be over 15,000 deaths in nursing homes.
I don't even want to get into the cover-up of the deaths and the political way that was kind of spun. What's important to me at this point, because Governor Cuomo already has his problems now, whether he survives or doesn't survive, who even knows? But I think at least the good thing that came out is this new legislation, which hopefully can protect people for years and years to come. That New York HERO Act. Yes. How did that happen? The name is great. Just talk to me a little about that.
Well, so this is Senator Yarelys' bill, and for those who don't know, Senator Yarelys is our deputy leader in the Senate, and he has been a champion of workers' rights for as long as he has been in the Senate. And so the New York Heroes Act is very much in line with his values and the things that he cares about. Essentially, what this bill does is it prevents occupational exposure to an airborne infectious disease by creating model infectious disease exposure prevention standards. It's a mouthful. And it also requires employers to implement these standards or plans. Why is this important? Because if you could just go back a year ago, yes, we did have the CDC guidelines. We know about pandemics and the possibility of them, but a lot of our workplaces did not have plans in place to make sure that not only are they following a checklist of best practices, but they didn't even know where to turn. Because if you could also remind yourself, you might not want to remind yourself, I don't want to certainly, but think about the federal government that we were under at the time and really the lack of even taking COVID seriously. So to be able to put in place these standards that really will create safe workplaces, because it was terrifying and it still is terrifying to many who have to go to work, are inside all day, and are really essential workers. So this is a protection, an extra layer of protection for them. And this also falls right in line with so many of the bills that we have passed in the Senate in the past week that we're looking forward to the Assembly passing, because we do need companion bills to pass in order for these bills to become law. But this is just like the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we're trying to do, which really at the end of the day is to provide safe workspaces, standards, make sure that everybody can follow them. And then if they're not followed, we have accountability measures now in place that it's undeniable what is going to be required. So there's no questions left out in the open or open for interpretation.
Are there also any financial benefits as well that's coming through these acts? I know there's some maybe sharing in terms of not so much work responsibility, but being able to, keep everybody on the payroll during trying times. Is there anything there as well?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we've seen is that we've allowed for something called partial unemployment. And this is something that already had existed, but we've added it on in terms of funding and making sure that the Department of Labor actually can give this as an option to employers. Why? Because if we allow for employers who have, a full set of employees to cut down hours, because it's better to cut hours than to fully go out of business, even though it's obviously a huge burden on many people to have their hours cut. We know that, but it's the point here is that, let's say an employee would work 5 days a week. Well, now if you work 4 days a week, and then New York State is able to through partial unemployment on that 5th day cover that cost, then not only do we have people still being able to have their wages be relatively the same, if not the same, but also we are able to remove the burden from employers, because as we know, so many of our small businesses are suffering. And that's another added layer of recovery that I am specifically I am hell-bent on, because we know so many of these businesses have been in people's families for decades. And so to watch as they are struggling financially it's not only devastating, but I feel responsible for being able to do something. So I know that we have a federal stimulus coming in, a very large amount of money, but at the same time, what I have been talking about as well is making sure that we raise revenue in our state. Why? Because during the pandemic, a lot of people have actually made more money than in their entire lifetime.
It's the economy of the haves and have-nots. That's what the pandemic has been.
True.
Listen, I would be remiss if I didn't discuss a little bit about the sexual harassment allegations with respect to the governor. Very serious. You cannot escape the Me Too movement. Tell me your thoughts, if you could.
Sure. So, listen, what we're hearing from the 3 women who've come forward so far, right? Lindsay Boylan, Charlotte Bennett, Anna Ruck, is and remains to be really disturbing accounts of the governor's behavior. Just to focus in on one particularly, what Charlotte Bennett described was almost like I shouldn't say that, a grooming situation where the governor is not only understanding and knows that Charlotte is a survivor of sexual abuse, but it then takes that information in and then asks her questions about her sex life. Now, why that is inappropriate, there's no gray area there. I don't think that any of us would think that there is because he is almost 30 years her senior. He is the governor of New York. This is in a workplace. And so, one of the hallmarks of of policies that I care about is sexual harassment, making sure that we are eradicating it from workplaces and passing really strong laws. But I think one of the things that I've not only learned, but is just becoming like abundantly clear to me is that it might be easy to pass a law, even though it's not easy to pass a law, but it might be easier to pass a law. What's very hard is to change a culture. And so it's going to take time, I think, for us to not only make sure that we are making clear that there is a zero tolerance policy for sexual harassment, abuse, misconduct, especially in a workplace, but also to make sure that we are raising the consciousness of everyone around us as well, so that we're all in agreement as a society, and that this is not something that, you know, we hear on the other side of, which I've been hearing looking at my comments. I know they tell us don't read the comments, but I do read the comments because I want to understand what are people thinking. And some of the comments I'm reading about these stories are, well, she should have said no, or she should have, you know, rejected him, or she should have told somebody right away. And it's that survivor shaming kind of behavior has got to stop. And why does it have to stop? Because it totally disregards the power dynamic that goes on between not only your superior, but this is not just any superior. This is the governor of the state of New York, someone who has actually been a champion of anti-sexual harassment in the workplace, reform. And so, you know, there really is no excuse. He knows better. And I think that his reasoning that he was being playful or that he was mentoring her is not only unfounded, it's not believable.
Well, you know, we're going to have to leave it there. You know, I completely agree with you on all accounts. Whether he survives or not, who really knows? But there's certainly a lot of lessons to be learned here. Senator, thanks again, as usual, for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, stay with us. Today's Verdict got so much more right after this. Okay, we are here today with our guest, Rose Pierre-Louis. We are extremely excited so she could explain to me and explain to all of you what we mean by Ranked Choice Voting NYC. Rose, thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, David. I'm excited to be on your show.
Let's get right to it. Let's go. Let's explain it from A to Z, just so we really understand it, because it's coming. Tell us in words that we would understand what ranked choice voting is.
So ranked choice voting provides the opportunity for voters to either rank 5 candidates in the order of their preference or select one candidate like they've always done. Under ranked choice voting, a candidate needs to receive 50% plus one of the vote to win. So let's say in a race for mayor, for example, let's say no candidate receives 50% plus one of the vote. What will happen is that the candidate that is in last place is eliminated, and the votes, the people that voted for that candidate that's eliminated, their second choice votes will be counted and distributed to the other candidates that are still in the race that they voted for. That process will continue until one person receives majority, which is 50% plus one of the vote. Keep in mind also that ranked choice voting is used in primaries and special election races for mayor, comptroller, public advocate, borough presidents, and city council races. So it's extremely important to understand that RCV will be used in those races and not races, for example, for district attorney, assembly, New York State Senate, et cetera.
So is this automatic now? Is this part of the society of New York City, this ranked choice voting, or is it something we're going to vote to have, or is this part of the landscape?
In 2019, after lengthy debate throughout New York City over almost 10 years, the Charter Revision Commission decided that it was time to place ranked choice voting as a referendum on the ballot, and it passed with 73% of the vote. So New Yorkers did vote to adopt ranked choice voting. So ranked choice voting went into effect January 1st, and it is happening. We've had 2 special elections that have happened in Queens, and we will have this month 2 special elections happening in the Bronx. And of course, June 22nd will be the big race, so to speak, for mayor, comptroller, public advocate, city council, and the borough presidents.
So Rose, what happens when you get into the ballot box? You fill out your choices, but you don't put all 5. Let's say you just put 1, 2, and 3, and then it turns out that your 1, 2, and 3 never make it to the first shot. It's like as if you don't get counted at all. Doesn't it seem that way?
Well, that's not exactly how it works. Again, keep in mind that New York City voters will have the opportunity to rank up to 5 or as few as they like, which would be 1. So let's say someone ranks 3 people and the candidate they ranked first gets eliminated. They still have candidates 2 and 3 in the race. So it's not as if your vote does not get counted, right? You still have additional candidates that remain in the race. And that's why it's important, in my view, to encourage New Yorkers to rank as many candidates as possible, because one of the exciting things about ranked choice voting is that it does give voters more options at the ballot box. So for example, a lot of times you hear New Yorkers say, well, I like candidate A, but I also love candidate B. And if I could make them one person, then I could vote for them under the old system. Well, now under ranked choice voting, you have the opportunity to vote for both of them, which often helps to eliminate the spoiler effect.
The negative person who comes out who just wants somebody to lose and splits votes. Am I correct?
Right. So that's really important. And ranked choice voting also has helped to increase representation for women, people of color, first-time candidates. So it is really a pro-voter reform. The process is going to be extremely transparent. The Board of Election is working very diligently to make sure that New Yorkers will be able to see round by round. So that's also important for.
How does that happen round by round? Is that it's interesting. Does that happen within a half an hour, immediately? How does that work? That's
in terms of the specific timing, what I could say that it does is there is software tabulation for tabulation, which is safe and secure, which right now approval is being sought by the New York City Board of Election from the State Board of Elections to use this tabulation software, which has been used in other ranked choice voting elections. And what will happen as of right now, until that approval is provided, is that there will be a hand count to certify the rounds, and then there'll be the tabulation software used in tandem. But what ranked choice voting helps to do is, one, eliminates costly runoff elections, right? That are often low turnout and extremely expensive. And it does, through the tabulation software, is what we call an instant runoff. So when I'm talking about one person gets eliminated, the votes get redistributed. So I think the process, in order to go through all of the rounds, it may take several days, but as that process is happening, New Yorkers will be able to see the tabulations of each round of the votes.
I happen to like it. I just wonder why it took 10 years. That's what I don't understand. Where was the pushback? Is it just people don't like change in NYC?
I don't think it's that. I think we are a city where, of many different perspectives, and there was a lot of deliberation. And we used to use ranked choice voting and school board elections. So this is not something new to New York City voters. As you may know, that the first ranked choice voting bill was introduced by then City Council member Gail Brewer in 2010, after there was a costly and low turnout runoff election for comptroller and public advocate in 2009. Over the course of that time, 2010, 2018, and then in 2019, the Charter Revision Commissions have done a lot of work engaging not only members of the legislature, but New Yorkers, community groups, good government groups to talk about ranked choice voting. And that's when they decided in 2019 to put it on the ballot.
Rose, good stuff. We really appreciate it. I think everyone knows now how it works, and everyone's going to get out there and they're going to vote for whatever candidate and how they want to do it. Certainly list their preferences and fill out the entire ballot. Hopefully that's the best way to go. Hopefully you come back and let us know how it goes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure, Rose. You take care. All right. Hang with us. Today's verdict will be back. More after this. Welcome back to today's verdict. We are lucky to have with us Brad Hoylman here today, state senator. Brad, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much. I'm really glad to be here, David.
It's our pleasure. There's been a lot of changes going on now that we have another president. New York City seems to be coming back. I'd like to hope it's coming back. What are your initial thoughts? Brand new day, bright day?
Yeah, well, a lot of us are still dealing with the COVID pandemic. That's clearly top of mind for most New Yorkers. They want to get vaccinated. They can't reach a vaccination center. The lines are kind of wonky. My office has been helping seniors and homebound folks try to get access to the vaccine. But I'm really glad that through the efforts of mine and LGBTQ health organizations, the governor last week expanded eligibility to those people with comorbidities, including people who have HIV/AIDS and are vulnerable to the virus. So it's so important that everyone get vaccinated. My own experience is such that, David, I signed up for the vaccine trial back in July.
Really?
And, was part of the trial at NYU Langone. I had my first shot in early August and the second one in late August. I didn't know whether I actually had the vaccine itself or the placebo. I had a 50% chance of getting either. They told me, as a matter of fact, last week when the study was unblinded, that I in fact had the real thing.
You did have the real, okay. I didn't know they finally tell you. I didn't realize that.
They do. They're doing that now because the vaccine is obviously being expanded to the general public, and they want to ensure that people who are eligible, even though I'm not eligible now if I hadn't participated in the study, they want to ensure that people who are eligible and have been in the study have an opportunity to get the real vaccine. But I had some side effects. They are mild, and it sure beats dying from COVID. So I feel good about playing a small part in this, very difficult time to try to beat this virus.
And the lines are long, Brad. They stretch around corners, and a lot of people who are signing up, they have issues. They're older. They're in wheelchairs, and yet it just seems like we're just not prepared enough to get those shots into the arms of the people who need it the most.
Well, we're not prepared and we're not equipped. And I'll tell you why. Look at how things have gone relatively well in a country like Israel, where they have a nationalized healthcare system. If we had a single payer system here in the state of New York or federally, we would, I believe, have a centralized response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I think that this pandemic and the government's response to it is a call to action to have a single payer system, and the New York State Health Act would accomplish that.
A lot of people would agree with you. Let's shift gears for a second or two. Talking about the LGBTQ community, the walking while trans law. Tell us a little about some of the things that have been going on up in Albany.
Well, we're very pleased, advocates, LGBTQ members, the transgender community, to have passed that bill a couple of weeks ago, which repeals an archaic section of the New York State penal statute that allows individuals to be arrested and prosecuted for just hanging out. Technically speaking, loitering for the purposes of prostitution, which is a very broad and general category, and allows law enforcement extremely broad discretion.
There was really never a clear understanding of what loitering ever was. Even growing up in Queens Village, you never knew, outside of a deli, if you would just stay there for a half an hour. What is loitering? Well, I'm an attorney. I don't even know the legal definition of it.
That's exactly the problem. It means basically hanging out with your friends or on a street corner that may have, been identified by, again, law enforcement as a place where people engage in nefarious activities. But that could be any street corner, and the actual application of the law is totally subject to the interpretation of the law enforcement officer. So, literally, David, people have been arrested, according to the police reports, because suspect was wearing a jean skirt, cowboy boots, and a tank top. That's just could apply to any individual. What it has done is it applies to, generally speaking, people of color. If a white woman is wearing leggings and on her way to Barry's boot camp, she's not going to get arrested for loitering for the purposes of prostitution. But if a transgender woman of color was doing the same, she actually, might get charged according to the statistics as to who gets arrested and sometimes who gets imprisoned for this offense, which we now have removed from our statute.
Final thoughts. We are becoming, hopefully, a little bit more of a progressive city. As you mentioned, it's taking a little time. Where do you see we are in 5 years in terms of the LGBTQ community? Are we going to get there?
Yes, I think we're well on the way. I think a large part of it has to do with the fact that there was a change of leadership in the New York State Senate. Some legislation that I carried was blocked for 8, 9, 10 years simply because, David, it had the acronym LGBTQ in it. It wasn't allowed to have a vote. And then when we did get those bills to the floor, the Republicans voted for them, including the Child Victims Act, which allows adult survivors of child sexual abuse to file claims against their abusers or the institutions that may have protected them. The Republicans held that up for 20 years. When it came to the floor, it was voted in approval unanimously. So that shows you the progress that we've made thanks to the Democratic State Senate in part, and of course the leadership of Andrea Stewart-Cousins, our Democratic leader.
Well, Senator, you're doing great work. We really appreciate it. Brad, hopefully you'll come back and give us an update in a couple of months.
Glad to be here. Thank you so much.
It's our pleasure. All right, well, stick around. Today's Verdict will be back right after this. Well, that's all for tonight. I'd like to thank our 3 guests for joining us, and of course, you, the viewers, for watching. If you have a future topic you'd like to see on the show, feel free to email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org. Till the next time, know your issues, reach a verdict. We'll see you in 2 weeks.